Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and keep watching more details. Believe it or not, Chicago PD ruins Ripley's emotional Chicago Med Season 10 story, but blame the writers. Dr. Mitch Ripley hits rock bottom one too many times in Chicago Med Season 10, and while the emotional resolution to his downward spiral is quite touching in a vacuum, a previous episode of Chicago PD actually ruins it. Luke Mitchell's Chicago Med Season 10 character has been through a lot in recent episodes. His friend, Sully, dies at the end of episode 10, leading to a string of destructive behavior from Ripley. Every harmful decision has only led to more chaos, and Sharon Goodwin later suspends Ripley from Gaffney Chicago Medical Center because she can't cut him a break any longer. To make matters worse, Dr. Hannah Asher breaks up with Ripley in Chicago Med Season 10, episode 14. She is tired of trying to help him, but to no avail, so despite her feelings for him, Asher decides the best thing she can do for Ripley is to let go. Jump ahead to episode 15. Ripley is trying to put the pieces of his life back together when he comes across a woman and her daughter stuck in a well. One thing leads to another, and Ripley eventually ends up in the hole, which is when Chicago Med borrows a storyline from Chicago PD. Ripley calls for help after discovering the trapped mother and daughter in the well in Chicago Med Season 10, Episode 15. Firehouse 128 arrives with Randall Mouch McColland, played by Chicago Fire Season 13 cast member Christian Stolt, who has been picking up extra shifts as a lieutenant, and they work together to save the two victims. At one point, Ripley goes into the well to help. However, after the mother and daughter escape, the walls cave in on the doctor, trapping him down there. After a while, Ripley starts losing oxygen, resulting in him hallucinating his late friend Sully. Above ground, Mouch and the firefighters are working hard to save Ripley in Chicago Med Season 10, Episode 15. Down below, Ripley is talking with Sully. His friend encourages him to hang on, and a heart-to-heart between the two ensues. As mentioned above, Ripley has been spiraling since Sully died, so the conversation between the two friends, which includes Sully advising Ripley to use his anger and channel it into something good, like surviving, helps Luke Mitchell's character get through this latest traumatic event. By the hour's end, Mouch and Sully saves Ripley, returning him to the surface. If one hasn't watched Chicago PD, Ripley's hallucination in Chicago Med Season 10, Episode 15 might seem unique and quite poignant. However, fans of the police procedural series will find this storyline familiar. In the Chicago PD Season 11 finale, Hank Voight is captured and tortured, resulting in him losing consciousness and subsequently hallucinating his late friend and partner, Alvin Olinsky. Since Olinsky had a much bigger presence in Chicago PD than Sully did in Chicago Med, his return in the police procedural series was a lot more effective. The second One Chicago TV show also spent more time establishing Voight and Olinsky's friendship, which is partly why Olinsky's death was so devastating and why Voight hallucinating him was more emotional than Ripley imagining Sully. Ultimately, since one can't help but compare the two, the events of the Chicago PD Season 11 finale weaken Ripley's storyline in Chicago Med Season 10, Episode 15. Of course, Ripley's reunion with Sully is emotional. However, because Chicago PD already did this storyline and did it better, the medical drama could have, and should have, handled Ripley's grief differently. Perhaps instead of putting Ripley into immediate danger to bring him back to reality, the writers could have taken a healthier, safer route like therapy. That might not have been as exciting, but it would solve the repetitive issue. Nevertheless, Ripley can now move forward, and as Luke Mitchell told TV Insider, become a new and improved Ripley, who takes ownership of his choices, in Chicago Med Season 10. For fans of One Chicago, the interconnected world of Chicago Fire, Chicago PD, and Chicago Med has always provided thrilling crossovers, gripping drama, and heart-wrenching character arcs. However, sometimes the synergy between these shows can do more harm than good, as seen in Season 10 of Chicago Med. Believe it or not, Chicago PD has inadvertently ruined Ripley's emotional arc in Chicago Med, and while it's tempting to point fingers at the procedural powerhouse, the real culprit is the writers. Ripley, played by the talented new addition to the Chicago Med cast, was poised to have one of the most compelling character journeys in recent seasons. His arrival at Gaffney Chicago Medical Center was marked by a mysterious past, a tormented conscience, and an undeniable brilliance in the operating room. Fans quickly latched onto his story, an ex-military surgeon trying to find redemption in civilian life after a tragedy in the field. His inner turmoil, compounded by PTSD and a reluctance to form close bonds with his colleagues, made him an intriguing enigma. All signs pointed toward a slow-burning emotional redemption arc, until Chicago PD got involved. What should have been a deeply personal exploration of Ripley's past and trauma took a sharp detour when Chicago PD decided to fold him into their crime-centric world. Rather than allowing his story to unfold organically within the medical setting, the writers forced an unnecessary crossover, shoehorning Ripley into a convoluted police subplot that stripped away the raw emotional weight of his backstory. Suddenly, he was no longer just a surgeon struggling to heal himself while healing others. He was now embroiled in a criminal investigation that felt more like an afterthought than an essential part of his journey. This jarring transition wasn't just frustrating for Chicago Med fans, it actively undermined Ripley's character development. His storyline became less about his own healing and more about serving as a plot device for Chicago PD to push its latest case of the week. The emotional depth that Chicago Med had carefully crafted was drowned out by shootouts, interrogations, and a poorly executed legal entanglement that felt forced from the start. The real problem here isn't Chicago PD itself. It's the writers who failed to respect the integrity of Ripley's arc. The One Chicago universe thrives on crossovers, but they need to be handled with care. In this case, the writers seemed more interested in making Ripley's past serve a crime procedural than allowing Chicago Med to explore his trauma with the nuance and sensitivity it deserved. Instead of letting Ripley's PTSD manifest through his interactions with patients, colleagues, and his personal struggles, the writers rushed to turn him into an action hero caught up in a police drama that barely scratched the surface of his pain. What should have been a slow-burning, emotionally resonant arc turned into a rushed, disjointed mess. By the time Chicago PD was done with him, Ripley felt like a shadow of the character he was introduced as, his emotional depth sacrificed for the sake of a lackluster crime subplot. It's not the first time One Chicago has mishandled a promising storyline due to an ill-conceived crossover. Characters from Chicago Med have often been pulled into Chicago Fire and Chicago PD in ways that detract from their personal growth rather than enhancing it. The issue isn't with the crossovers themselves, but with the way they're written. When done right, these collaborations can add layers to a character's journey. When done poorly, they feel like blatant distractions that rob characters of their emotional complexity. Ripley's arc had all the ingredients for a standout Chicago Med storyline: an emotionally wounded doctor seeking atonement, a slow-burning trust-building dynamic with his new colleagues, and a chance to explore PTSD in a meaningful way. But rather than allowing that depth to unfold within Chicago Med, the writers yanked him into Chicago PD, transforming his introspective battle with trauma into an overblown crime investigation. By the time he returned to Chicago Med, his story felt disjointed. The emotional weight he had carried early in the season had been diluted by the unnecessary crossover, making it difficult for fans to reconnect with him in the way they initially had. His arc no longer felt like his own, it felt like a casualty of lazy writing and misplaced priorities.